Let's talk about how Jeff or Jane come to this personally.
Right.
Okay? Because
Yeah.
in this session, we're going to be talking about the director's responsibility, but who they are as a person, finding themselves on the
Yes.
board of this faith organization.
Yes.
They're probably thinking, I shouldn't be here because I'm not sure. I'm not even sure I'm a Christian.
Right.
I don't really know the Bible. I'm not actually that good of it. I have a lot of problems. I've made a lot of mistakes. Maybe I'm currently making mistakes now. You know, there are all kinds of struggles on family life, addiction, job. Where's my other types of leadership going? As you know, Dave, like we've been trying to, you know, we're aiming at somebody who's probably been collared by their grandmother or their mother
Right.
to say, you need to be on the board of the family church, right?
Yeah.
But throughout this journey, isn't it the case that we've seen so many Jeffs and Janes who find their spirituality through this work, right? Where they realize some of them are colleagues, old friends of their mom or their dad who are still alive, right? And they realize that actually the way in which they can lead through conflict and helping, it is a generational transfer that they're involved in.
For sure. But I think the challenge is, and often I've seen two narratives. One is they come in with fresh ideas. They come in wanting to see change, and they're hit by nostalgia from the past. No, we can't change. No, we can't shift. And they're constantly hit by this, no, we can't. That they end up pulling away and going, this isn't worth it. So I've seen that.
And they take that shred of faith renewal with them when they do that.
And they take that and they start up really cool nonprofits. They're changing, which we also see in the social impact space. But then there also is if it's received, if they come in and those older members are able to soften and go, no, we have to shift. We have to do something different. There can be a renewal. There can be a sense of hope restored.
And if we could harness the experience that Jeff or Jane have, they know how to run a corporation, right?
Right.
This session on the directors, they could have led this session. But what they struggle with is finding out how to manage a board who feel quite differently, who have different expectations of what this leadership team will do, and navigating some genuinely pretty difficult problems that don't have easy solutions.
Yes. Well, and I think the challenge is most board members of a church are sitting on the board because they have a personal agenda. There's something personal in which they're hanging on to and going, we don't want this changed, and that's why I'm on this board. I am a carrier of, I will not be moved on this, and this is why I'm here. And you have a number of those around the table. And so how does any change happen? So you have to, as we're going to discover in this session, is remove your personal agendas because it's not what you're there to do. You're there to hold the hope of the corporation.
You're reminding me of one of my first stories when I first got back from the UK. I'd been there, as you know, for 14 years. And a bishop, I won't say where, but called me and said, please, will you fly to my city? And I need some help. And I said, well, what can I help you with, Bishop? And he said, I'll tell you when you get here. And I got there. He drove me around his city and showed me all the different churches. And then he began to tell me about this meeting we were having that night with the board of their flagship church, which was also their most difficult church. And as he began to go through the characters, I realized there were 3 or 4 that were really causing a lot of trouble. And they were led by one fellow who was also involved in some other community thing where he was a leader there. And as I got further, I realized, Bishop, surely you're going to talk to the guy. I'm just your wingman. And I realized the bishop had me there to have this conversation without him present.
Right.
And in the meeting, after literally 5 minutes, this exact fellow, exactly as the bishop had said, he stood up, he said, over my dead body will those pews come out.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And the bishop had said to me, Graham, the one thing I'll tell you is don't back down. When they start to push you around, you are here to be bad cop.
Yep. Yes.
So I said, when he said over my dead body, I said, is that what we should do? Should we wait for you to die?
Right.
Or shall we make the best decision for this congregation?
Or should we...
Jeff or Jane, they're facing this. They even know who that one person is, right?
No, for sure.
If only, that's our prayer, isn't it? In this director's responsibility, if only we could use good governance to help deal with that and engage it constructively.
That's right.
We could see a win.
100%. I want to welcome you to the second session, which is a director's responsibility, really looking at what questions should Jeff and Jane be asking. Graham.
Thanks, Dave. In this session, we are looking at how you are guiding a corporation. Corporation is a legal or moral person that you are the director of, along with your fellow directors or trustees or elders. That corporation may exist in relationship with another corporation. It might be your diocese, your presbytery, your denomination. And together with that corporation, if appropriate or if relevant in your situation, you are often all under, and we assume that you are under, the Canada Revenue Agency, or if you're watching from another district, your national government's jurisdiction on how registered charities are regulated. So this is the context for our conversation today. Our assumption with Jeff or Jane is that you may already be the director of several other corporations. You may know exactly how that works and have experience in the legal understanding of a corporation. Our simple statement for you at the beginning is to say, everything you've ever learned about any other corporation may well apply for a church corporation.
Yes.
In some senses, people think that it doesn't really matter when you're a director of a church corporation. It's not as much of a responsibility. Legally, that's not the case. And this is a good point for us to underline what we have on a number of other occasions in the course, a disclaimer about the kind of advice that we're offering. Neither Dave or I are lawyers. We're not accountants. We're not real estate brokers. We happen to both be pastors for what that's worth. But this advice is not legal advice and cannot be taken as legal or accounting or any other professional advice. What it is, however, is our understanding of the common pitfalls that many church board directors face when they come into the question of how am I going to act as a director of this corporation. So here are a few key points we're going to go through. First, you are guiding a corporation. You may want to ask what the purpose of that corporation is. Legally, many charities have a phrase, it's called a charitable object or purpose, which sounds something like the furtherance of the Christian faith according to the Baptist tradition or Anglican tradition. What that means is that's the purpose of your organization. If you want to do anything else that's not furthering the Christian faith, or you come from another faith background, that faith, or if you're not doing it according to that tradition, you're not adhering to those objectives. The idea that you are furthering the Christian faith according to a particular tradition is the beginning of an opening to your relationship with your diocese or your denomination. There may be other contracts, bylaws, other ways in which your clergy are licensed or authorized by your denomination, or other denominational bylaws, or in the Anglican Church are called canons, same in the Catholic Church, which govern the relationship between you as a local congregation and that denominational entity. Second question is, how might you measure whether you are achieving that purpose? In some cases, denominations will ask for an annual return, which is done alongside your national return. In Canada, that's called the T3010, which is regulated by the Canada Revenue Agency, and many congregations will have those dual returns. The Canada Revenue Agency will be more interested in the financial information. The diocesan return may ask you things like how many people worshiped in the church, how many people were baptized, how many were married. The question of how are we doing towards achieving our objective is the kind of question you would ask of any corporation, and we would encourage you to begin asking that question in the start of your work as a director.
And I think what happens, Graham, within many church boards is when they take on the responsibility, and there's something unique about church and faith spaces where often we don't come in to those meetings supporting the organization or the corporation, as you say, but it's actually I have a personal bent. I want this style, or I want this to happen, and so we come in actually trying to promote our personal agendas. And I think that happens a lot on boards, and specifically church boards. So how can we differentiate from that and actually step back and go, this isn't about my personal style that I want to see pushed forward, or I want to see this ministry happen, but it's actually what's the best.
Or that's my pew.
Exactly, and you don't take it out. But actually what's best for the expansion and growth of the corporation.
So there's an ethical and obvious conversational reason for that, isn't there, Dave? Like,
Yeah.
put your own desires to one side.
To one side.
There's
But it's
also-
so hard in churches to do that. Like, it just, I don't know. It just seems
so hard.
It seems hard.
One of the challenges with guiding a corporation is that you are legally required
That's
to do
right.
that.
Yes.
To put your own interests to one side and make sure that you are acting in the best interest of the corporation. The next thing you'll begin asking is, do we have a plan for achieving our measurable objectives? Now, this may get a little bit harder. You may have something like a ministry action plan. And looking back at it, you may want to ask the question, how have we been doing historically? Now, I'm going to pause for a minute to say, just those first 3 questions can cause a deep crisis in a congregational board, especially one that's been facing years of struggle with their property. What I mean by that is nobody's really clear of the purpose of this organization. When we say in the Anglican tradition, we're not agreed or even convinced by what that might mean. We don't actually have any measure of what success would look like. And if we did, the measures are really not looking good. And then in terms of a plan to get out of that situation, we've got something that may have resembled a mission action plan for some time ago, but because every one of our meetings has been dealing with the roof falling in or the massive deficit, we haven't looked at that for some time. The next few questions to begin asking as a director are questions about money. Where are our sources of revenue? Where are they coming from? And what is the trajectory? Have they been growing? Have they been declining? In Canada, revenues for religious congregations have been steadily declining before the pandemic, and the pandemic, we believe, is going to see a sharper decline, perhaps the sharpest decline ever in Canadian history. At the same time, expenses have been going up, not only because many of you are stewarding difficult, challenging heritage buildings, but also because of the rising rate of inflation, construction costs.
And we're also seeing in many of the projects that we're working with, ministers are part-time, they're not full-time. So we're seeing part-time clergy. We're seeing lots of challenges within the budget itself.
So you may be looking at all of these questions and saying, I am a director, but get me out of here. This is really, really difficult. Our hope is that you don't have to leave and that you can make decisions to see the best interest of the corporation through good decisions that you and your team will make. One of the other questions you may be asking is, what happens if we have a shareholders revolt? And by the way, who are the shareholders of this company? Well, in Canada and in most other Western countries, a registered charity does not have any shareholders. It's a company without share capital. That's the starting point of a not-for-profit corporation. But in terms of the concept of a charity, the idea is that all society has a stake in that charity. Let's follow through why that makes sense. Your charity receives a tax treatment that allows donations to come in and be exempt from income tax for the person who's giving that money. That is a social contract between society and your congregation to say that money is working for the common good. We believe that the best way to think about your congregation is that the widest and largest group of shareholders is in fact all society, and particularly your local community. You may also look at your stakeholders as being members of the congregation, and you can think about the members who are in front of you today. We would encourage you to also think of the members who left recently, as well as those members who may have a historical connection to the church. These are not shareholders. You don't get a Class A share if you turned up for worship, for the past 6 months, and a Class B share if you were here over the last 10 years. Of course, that doesn't work because during COVID, we have not been able to see that kind of attendance. In fact, all shareholders, all stakeholders are part of that charitable system. But it's a decision you can make to give a higher seat at the table for those who may not seem like the most likely stakeholders. You may have heard us referring earlier to the idea of having a meeting for the grandchildren of those around at the church. That's a great way to start to think about who the stakeholders are, even if there are no shareholders of the charity that you govern.
And I think the stakeholders as well as the neighborhood in which it's located in. So when you think about the community, what is the common good that we're actually providing to the environment in which we're located in? And I love that Canadian charities actually have this embedded in them. Is your responsibility is not just to benefit yourself, but what's the good in which you are engaging in in the community around you.
And from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, many times there are members of your neighborhood, co-citizens, your neighbors, who feel in some ways like you've removed their shareholder rights. They have something to say about what would happen in that church. Maybe they used to attend.
Right.
They've driven by that church every day. It's a part of their neighborhood. And they're upset if you're going to sell a part of that property to development. We came across a study last year of 20 churches in the United States who have successfully implemented affordable housing projects. Out of the 20, 7 have been sued, all of them by their neighbors. So this idea of excluding your neighbors can have an enormous cost if you get it wrong.
That's right.
But an incredible benefit if you get it right.
If you get it right.
Second section we want to cover is that you are working for the good of the corporation. What does that exactly mean? The good of the corporation and its stakeholders, which we've described, and its related stakeholders, that could be your denomination, your city, can often come into conflict, especially during the repurposing of such a key asset as a church building. Your responsibility as a director is to make the best decisions for the corporation, setting aside your personal desire, but becoming aware of those wider stakeholders and trying to create the kind of environment where people, instead of coming forward with, I don't want it this way, I want it this way, to begin using the language of, actually, this is what our denomination has asked us to do. Here's the bishop's new strategy. We would like to be part of that. Here's the mayor's new strategy. We would like to be part of that.
Yeah, what's the city's master plan? How do we connect into what the neighborhood and the community is reimagining? How do we join in what's going on just outside of the personal outcomes that we want? What are the larger ways that we can join in with what's happening?
You may have had the unfortunate experience of seeing, or perhaps even preaching a sermon where you really had an idea you wanted to get across, and so you found a biblical text to underline the argument you'd already made. Using these plans, like, as Dave said, the city's master plan, a diocesan strategy plan, a neighborhood action plan, simply to argue that things should stay the same way they've always ever been in your place of faith, is often not going to get to the bottom of where the rest of the community is going. This is the place where asking those stakeholders and treating them like a kind of shareholder, giving them a solid seat at the table, is something that we believe releases resources at other parts of the story. In the case that we described in Edmonton at McDougall United Church, where the 3 Muslim congregations came to join the United Church, in that situation, the idea of giving agency to those Muslim congregations actually encouraged the Community Foundation to lean forward with a very favorable loan to that building, which was never available to the Christian congregation on its own. So this idea of bringing stakeholders in as a kind of shareholder is something which has incredible power throughout this whole story. So those are our first 2 points. You are guiding a corporation, and you must work for the good of that corporation. The third area to think about is that your corporation owns real property. At this point, if you have been a director of any other company that owned property, we think it's probably helpful for you to think of everything you've ever learned from that in this situation. What is the property? How much of it do you have? How is it owned? What is the condition of that property? How much will it cost to repair that property to bring it up to a current code? Building code is one thing when you're doing new building. There could be other safety codes and other regulations required to keep that property in good legal working order. What kind of insurance do you have? Is it adequate insurance? Does it cover your errors and omissions? Does it cover your director's liability? And does it cover anything which might happen inside the property and its usages? If you need any help with any of those things, we would strongly encourage you to find the different professionals. These are lawyers, insurance brokers and specialists, accountants. You can come and talk to us to begin asking those questions and make sure that you as a director are satisfied that you've received all of the answers that you require.
It really is difficult. One of the phases that we engage in the work is a listening phase. And in the listening phase, we want to listen to the land and the property. But it's helpful if you as a congregation actually start with listening to it yourself. Meaning, what is the land asset that we're on? What condition is that land asset in? but also the question around, let's listen to it and go, what could be possible here? If you are a congregation that, is dwindling and you're 30 people in a building sanctuary that seats 700, you probably don't need that much space. So if you have a parking lot, with 150 stalls and you've got 40 people coming on a Sunday, there may be, again, usages that we're not considering within the land asset itself. And you're to steward the land and to care for it. So we are having environmental atrocities on buildings because they're used 5% of the time during a given week. People are not using the building in ways that actually animate it.
That's actually quite frustrating for many people in a local community when they see a church sitting in a mostly empty 30,000 square foot heritage site and running banners all over the place, talking about their environmental footprint and how they want all the big companies to do different things. And meanwhile, that space is being heated all the time.
Being heated.
The space is empty.
Windows where the heat goes out more than contained in. So we need to, again, listen to the building and the land and go, what is it saying? And does it meet the needs and requirements that we actually have as a corporation? Or do adjustments need to be made?
The final area for you to consider under your director's responsibility is any responsibilities you may have directly, legally, and quite seriously with your denomination should any decision happen to do with the redeployment of your property. Certainly, if you are part of what might be called a mainline denomination like the Anglican, United, Presbyterian, Lutheran churches, there are very strict rules from your region, usually, on how those kind of decisions would be made. Our advice is always to take that advice from the denomination early and also to understand that they may have some of their own objectives. We hope that this conversation may help you and equip you to have that conversation with your denomination and ask, what are their hopes for any possible redeployment? And how are we going to deal with the conflict if the parish and the diocese have two different views, which in turn, again, are different from what the neighborhood might hope for? These are the kinds of decisions that you'll have to make. And if you understand what your legal responsibilities are with your denomination, you'll be better equipped and you'll make sure that we don't lose time at a critical moment when a key decision may need to be made. So that's a whistle-stop tour through a director's responsibilities. Once again, only a lawyer can explain to you the direct importance of all of the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, any other requirements that you may have from your denomination. But coming into this situation, understanding this is a corporation, you are one of its directors, you have responsibilities, and to encourage you to ask the obvious questions and make sure that you and your board have those answers ready. It's vital to every part of what's going to come next.